In this video segment, I'm going to take you through how you can appropriately prompt and guide your AI language model to provide you with more control over the output. So whether you're trying to use it for very quick things, whether you're trying to use it for in-depth analysis, regardless of who you are talking to, regardless of the output you need, regardless of the level of detail you need, you can get a perfect result for the task in hand. So just going to very quickly go back through the 4-part prompt formula that we've looked at earlier in this video series. And this is a really great formula for writing perfect prompts. So considering the role that the AI is pretending to be, the task that you want it to do, the context, so putting in the background information, the situation, and finally the output, the tone. Now that's a great formula, but what it perhaps doesn't do right now is it doesn't specify necessarily the level of detail, it doesn't specify the audience, it doesn't necessarily specify the format itself. So essentially what we are going to do in this segment is build on this 4-prompt formula, talking about how we can use this formula, how we input this formula, but we adapt for the role, we adapt for the audience, we adapt for the detail, and we adapt for the tone and the formatting to help us get the best results. So we'll start by looking at the level of detail. Now, of course, we want to adapt our output based on the level of detail we need. And also, this is two-pronged in the sense of showing you the fact that it won't provide you with lots of detail unless you specify it to do so. But it also could be in situations where you don't need to provide lots of detail, where it needs to be very quick and very succinct. So for example, a basic prompt might be explain cash flow. You are just talking to a client, you need to explain cash flow. So if you just say explain cash flow, you're going to get a very basic textbook definition of cash flow. It's not necessarily going to provide you with the insights you need. Whereas if you were to say something along the lines of explain the 3 main types of cash flow, operating, investing and financing with examples relevant to a small e-commerce business using platforms like Shopify or Stripe, you're going to get far more specific tailored business insights, which is particularly going to be relevant if you are dealing with a small e-commerce client. So in a sense, you get the scope with your prompt. Vague gets vague, detailed gets detailed. So let's take a quick look at an example of this in action. So you see here I've got the first prompt here, explain cash flow. And if we just ask GPT to explain cash flow, as I predicted, it's given us a very basic textbook definition of it. Now, to be fair, it's gone into a bit of detail, but it is still very generic. It's the kind of thing that you might see in a textbook rather than something that is specific to the client, rather than something that is specific to this situation. So let's flip over to our other prompt now. And this one was to explain the 3 main types of cash flow, but with examples to a small e-commerce business using certain platforms. And as you might expect, we're going to get a more detailed, more specific output here. And you can see it's going into far more detail of operating cash flow here, examples of operating cash flow, both inflows and outflows, and why it matters for an organization, and so on. So you can see a far more detailed output and a far more specific output because of the nature of the prompt that we gave it. So in summary, the level of detail matters. It affects the outputs that the large language model provides. So in a sense, prompt quality equals output quality. If you ask for specific details, if you request specific examples based on your context, and you provide more background context, you're going to produce a far better output, a far more appropriate response that you can then use, you can tailor, you can edit, and provide it to your clients. And also adjusting for audience is important as well. We've looked at the level of detail, but we now need to look at the audience. And it's not as simple as, well, certain people need more detail or not. Certain audiences need different outputs as well. Not just in terms of the detail, but in terms of the tone, in terms of what you want them to do with that information. So for example, if you were looking at dividend taxation. Now, if you were discussing dividend taxation with your colleagues, with other accountants, and explaining it to them, you would explain it in a different way than you would to your clients. So for example, with your clients, you might want to explain it in plain English. So you might use a prompt like, explain limited company dividend tax for a new business owner in plain English. So you're implying a casual tone that avoids jargon here. Whereas if you are talking to another accountant, you might ask to provide a technical breakdown of dividend taxation for a qualified accountant. Again, it's the same topic, but you're adjusting it based on the audience needs. So again, let's go and see what GPT gives us. So our first prompt here, explain limited company dividend tax for a new business owner in plain English. So you can see the tone here. Dividends are payments that you, as a shareholder, take from your company's profits after the company has paid its corporation tax. And then it talks about how it's taxed. And then it talks about the process of it. And it talks about the current rates as well. So you can see this is the sort of thing you might send to a client. It's very straightforward. It's very basic. It's very broken down. But it still explains exactly what they need to know. So very useful prompt there based on the audience. So let's take a look at our more specific one for accountants. And here we asked it to provide a technical breakdown of dividend taxation for a qualified accountant. Now, of course, it's explaining US ones. We could be more specific in our prompt there. We're asking for specifically for the UK, but again, this is more just for demonstrative purposes. And you can see it's gone into more detail there. It's also talked about specific things such as the use of alphabet shares and dividend splittings. So a far more technical answer there that also includes international financial reporting standards. That talks about which foreign shareholders as well. So a much more detailed output with more specific information that a more technical individual might need to know. So a key takeaway there is that depending on who you are speaking to, depending on the audience, you need to adjust your input, you need to adjust your prompt, and you need to consider your audience when you are creating your prompt. So always specify your audience. Who is actually going to read this output? Who is it for? Does it need to be simplified? Does it need to be technical or anything in between? And why do they need to read it? What sort of action are you expecting your audience to take after reading this? If you are producing training information, you should then write it in a way that is going to expect them to take that learning away and to apply it and to put their own spin on it and to think about what works for them, what doesn't work for them. If it's for a client that you are then expecting to take actions based on the output, etc., you need to do that. And also managing the output form and format. So again, talking about who is going to read it here, what it's going to look like, but also the format that it needs to be in. And we're going to use an example, using the same example here, the same inputs of how we can get 3 completely different outputs depending on how we prompt. So for example, we might want it to be in bullet points for a team briefing format. Some information that we're analyzing. We might want it in a friendly email tone for a client update. We might want it in a formal report for a presentation to the partners of the firm or to the management of the clients, for example. So let's take a look at the same information and see how we can prompt our analysis in 3 different ways and how we get 3 different outputs. And this is the information that we're going to use here. Again, it's very, very generic. You will have seen it earlier in the video series. It's completely generic. It is just information that has been written purely for demonstrative purposes. It's very simplified, but again, it's just for showing you what the large language model can do. So we've got our first prompt. We've got our Excel spreadsheet that has been inserted into the ChatGPT, and we've asked it to summarize these clients' figures into bullet points for a team briefing with your fellow accountants. So this might take slightly longer because it's got to analyze the figures. So we'll just give it a moment. And you can see it's analyzed in bullet points a key list of figures. So talking about product sales and the growth, both in terms of the nominal cash value growth and also the percentage growth for these different figures. So we can then go into that client meeting or that management meeting with the fellow accountants and say client 1 has gone, their product sales has gone up 14.3%, their service income has gone up 36.4%, and so on. So very quick and easy, just analyze the figures and provide us with some information in bullet points. Now the second prompt, this is where we perhaps speaking to that client themselves. We're going to analyze the same information, but we're going to use that information instead to draft a friendly update email for a business client who is not financially trained. So again, we'll let it do that. Again, it might take a bit longer. And you can see that the layout of the email is there, that it's summarizing some of the key figures, but it's talking about them in a far more friendly and less fun. It's not putting lots of specific percentage and percentage index point updates and these sorts of things. It's giving some brief explanations of why this might happen, and then it's asking us if we want to go over this in more detail, if we want to take some steps to work on these figures, etc. So the tone is there, the format is there, it's much more in the format of a communication that you would send directly to a client. And then finally, we've got our writing a management report based on these figures that includes a summary, commentary, and recommendations. So we would expect again to see a different output from this same group of figures. As you can see, the output is generating now. It's much more in a report format. It's more formal in its language. It's got the executive summary there. It's talking about the revenue and the cost of goods sold and the profit with more of a commentary on it, largely due to higher logistics costs, etc. And it's even providing us with some specific recommendations of how we can improve performance in the next quarter. So that should show you the difference in output that can be achieved when specifying exactly how you want the output formatted. And you could summarize the formats in various different ways. You could ask it to give a brief overview. You could ask it to produce a draft email so it's communication ready. You could have bullet points or a full-blown report as well. But all of these have their own merits and are useful outputs, useful formats for different situations. And by prompting the AI effectively, you can make sure you are producing the right information for the right scenario. And also a few things to remember as well when you are asking it to produce an output is the tone. The tone also affects the output. The tone also affects who you're giving it to, the level of detail, etc. So you might want to put it in a formal format and specify formal to provide a more formal structured output, a neutral for a very balanced objective approach. And what I mean by that is use the terms neutral, provide a neutral report or provide a formal report, provide a email in a neutral style, email in a formal style. A casual, where it's more conversational. It will sound more like you are actually speaking to the person rather than writing something to them. Or friendly as well, making it very warm, very personable. And how you prompt it to produce its tone also affects the output, and therefore you can adjust your prompt for the perfect level of communication for the communication you're trying to deliver. So in summary to this section then, we've built on that 4-part prompt summary where we looked at the role, the task, the context, the output, etc. But we've put some more specific details on how we would prompt it, how we would use that formula, but how we would adjust for the audience, we would adjust for the level of detail, we would adjust for the nature of the format and the output as well. So hopefully there's going to be some really useful information in there for you to help you to write perfect prompts for your audience based on who they are, based on the level of detail and the knowledge that they have.